Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into a story that is just absolutely fascinating, mostly because it runs on two completely parallel tracks. On the one hand, you've got this highly complex, multi-stage mechanical and cosmetic restoration of a classic American sports car. But on the other hand, we're looking at a deeply emotional, very human story of loss, memory, and resilience. We're going to break down exactly what happens when a machine sits in the dark for 2 straight decades, the actual science of bringing it back to life, and the incredible memories attached to its steering wheel. Let's get right into it. So the source material introduces us to Joe. He's this older gentleman with a barn, and inside that barn sits a car that hasn't moved in a very, very long time. His optimistic outlook is just perfectly captured when the detail and rescue crew first roll up, and he casually suggests they just tickle the key a little bit and see what happens. It totally establishes who Joe is, you know? He's endearing, he's optimistic, and maybe he's holding out a little bit of hope that a car sitting for 20 years might miraculously just fire right up. Spoiler alert, guys, it didn't. They got some lights on the dash, sure, but the engine was completely dead, so they had to winch it out onto a flatbed. And right here, we really see what's actually at stake. Because this isn't just your run-of-the-mill barn find. Yes, it's a black 1990 C4 Corvette, but more importantly, the crew finds out that this car actually belonged to Joe's late wife, who passed away suddenly. It's literally been sitting there, rotting away for nearly 20 years, acting as this giant time capsule for Joe's memories of her. So you see, the crew's ultimate goal isn't just to detail a car. It's to get this thing running and driving so Joe can sit in that exact seat and relive those fond memories. To pull off something of this magnitude, the crew has to formulate a strict 3-step battle plan. They're going to tackle this machine from the outside in. Step 1 is a massive exterior decontamination, which, by the way, takes 2 full days all on its own. Step 2 is interior hazard removal because nature has absolutely reclaimed the cabin. And step 3 is the ultimate test, reviving that dormant engine. Now, what makes this specific piece of hardware so interesting is that it isn't just a standard C4. For starters, it features a highly desirable 6-speed manual transmission, rather than the much more common 4-speed automatic. Second, sitting under that massive clamshell hood is the legendary L98 engine. Now, just a couple of years later, Chevy introduced the LT1 engine. That one had higher horsepower, sure, but it was notoriously more problematic. The L98 we're looking at here only produced 250 horsepower, but man, it pushed out a massive 300 pound-feet of torque. Car enthusiasts absolutely love the L98 because it's incredibly reliable and all that low-end torque makes it super fun to drive on the street. So you might be wondering, how exactly does it make all that signature low-end torque? Well, it all comes down to tuned port injection. Unlike older cars that use a carburetor to just sort of blindly dump fuel and air into the engine, this Corvette uses computers to precisely control its fuel injectors. If you look at the intake manifold, it uses these really distinct long tubes called runners. That specific elongated design is the literal science behind why this engine produces such strong, aggressive low-end and mid-range torque. And that specific engineering builds directly into the valuation of the car. Back in 1990, the manufacturer's suggested retail price for this particular Corvette was around $32,500. But if we take that number and run it through a modern inflation calculator, that equates to roughly $80,000 in today's money. Which brings up a pretty wild contrast when we compare these classic automotive specs to modern standards. I mean, think about it. Would you pay $80,000 today for a sports car that only puts out around 245 to 250 horsepower? Today, your average family sedan can easily push 300 horsepower. But back in 1990, this was peak American performance. It's just a really great reminder of how far automotive engineering has come, but also how much character these classic machines still retain. All right, returning to our battle plan, step 1 is the exterior. And let me tell you, decades of dirt and contamination require actual chemistry to fix, not just water. First, they do a pre-wash to lift the top layer of dirt so it doesn't get dragged across the clear coat and scratch it. Next up is an iron remover spray, which causes this fascinating chemical reaction. It bonds with microscopic iron particles lodged in the paint and literally turns bright purple as it dissolves them. Finally, they use a specialized clay mat to physically agitate and pull the remaining contaminants out, leaving the paint feeling buttery smooth. Even after all that cleaning, the paint itself was still heavily scratched and oxidized. To fix this, the crew has to employ a mechanical 2-step polishing process. First, a rotary polisher paired with a wool pad and cutting compound does the heavy lifting. This essentially erases the deep scratches and decades of dull oxidation. But because that process is so aggressive, it leaves its own little micro marks. So, step 2 brings in a dual-action polisher with a softer foam pad and a finishing polish. This refines the surface and restores that black paint to a mirror-like, basically brand new finish. Okay, so the outside looks fantastic. Now let's move on to step 2, the interior. And wow, the reality of a true barn find is incredibly gross. When they took the Corvette's roof off to get better access, they found a full-on biological disaster zone. I'm talking a massive mouse nest packed directly into the center console, feces everywhere, giant spider webs completely spanning the cabin, and deep, heavy rust stains soaking right into the carpets. The team literally had to strap on masks just to safely begin pulling all this stuff out. Actually, the crew discovered something inside that is known in the detailing industry as mouse highways. Yeah, it's exactly as nasty as it sounds. These are distinct trails carved all throughout the Corvette's carpet. Basically, when mice live in a car for 20 years, they step in their own feces and intuitively run along the exact same pads over and over and over again. Over time, it mats down the carpet into these visible, highly contaminated little roads. So the big question is, how do you even neutralize a biohazard like this? Well, it requires some heavy-duty chemical intervention. To tackle those deep rust stains, they apply a generous amount of Rust-Oleum rust remover directly to the carpet, and it literally dissolves the stain away right before your eyes. Then they use hot water extraction to pull all that liquid out. Finally, to deal with those lovely mouse highways, they completely saturate the cabin with powerful enzyme removers. These enzymes actively break down the organic material and kill off all the harmful bacteria left behind by the rodents. With the car finally looking and smelling brand new inside and out, we reach step 3, engine revival. Now, you absolutely cannot just turn the key on a car that has sat for 2 decades. You will destroy the engine. It's a whole process. First, a fresh side mount battery goes in. Then, they carefully siphon out the 20-year-old stale gasoline and replace it with fresh fuel. Next, they verify the oil and coolant are still sitting at safe levels. Finally, they hook up a spark tester to ensure electrical current is actually reaching the engine. Only then, after all those checks, do they crank it. And what happens next brilliantly illustrates that you always have to expect the unexpected with these projects. When the engine finally fired up, which incredibly it did, it produced a hilarious surprise. The sudden exhaust pressure violently shot 4 black plastic fake chicken eggs directly out of the tailpipe. As it turns out, these are used in barns to encourage real chickens to lay eggs in nesting boxes. Somehow, some little animal had dragged 4 of these fake eggs all the way up into the Corvette's exhaust pipes to store them for winter. Just wild. But just as the car is perfectly restored and running like a dream, everything comes crashing to a halt. Right before the big reveal, Joe is suddenly hospitalized. And this wasn't a minor issue, folks. He spent 4 days in the hospital, requiring 4 bags of blood just to stabilize his dangerously low red blood cell count. Even scarier, doctors suspected treatable cancer in his spine. Understandably, the entire project had to be paused immediately as Joe's health took absolute priority over everything else. So the crew had to pivot. They quickly realized this was no longer just about fixing up a car. It was about supporting a man going through a really terrifying health scare. When Joe was finally released and able to stand upright again, the crew decided to surprise him with a highly personalized get-well gift before even showing him the car. Knowing he is a massive Jimmy Buffett fan, they bought and signed a Margaritaville guitar for him. Joe even joked that he was going to let it ride in the passenger seat right where his wife used to sit. And that leads us to the ultimate emotional payoff. When Joe finally sees the polished, running Corvette, and he hears that familiar L98 engine growl, you can just see the memories come flooding right back. He tells this beautiful story about his late wife. He says one day he heard a massive commotion outside, and he turns around to see his wife in this exact Corvette, completely sideways in the road, doing a massive, howling, smoky burnout. When she got back to the house, he asked what on earth she was doing. Her response, "Well, I just couldn't stop." Why stop? It's such a vivid, incredible memory brought perfectly back to life by the sight and sound of this machine. Earlier in this explainer, we talked about the $80,000 inflation-adjusted value of this car against its 245 horsepower. From a purely technical, data-driven standpoint, maybe it doesn't make total financial sense. But when you factor in a widower hearing an engine growl that instantly reminds him of his wife doing smoky burnouts, I mean, how do you put a price tag on that? It brilliantly illustrates that sometimes the true value of a machine has absolutely nothing to do with its spec sheet. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I hope this breakdown helped you grasp both the mechanics and the heart behind this incredible restoration. Keep learning, and I'll catch you on the next one.